Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Lisa Sawsville, and I'm the Executive Director of Vermont Coverts, Woodlands for Wildlife. We're a peer-to-peer organization, and we work to educate landowners and others about sound forest management and wildlife stewardship. This year, we're celebrating 40 years of outreach, empowering landowners and others with the knowledge, tools, and community support to manage their woodlands to enhance it for wildlife. This year, we have our 40th celebration coming up in September. Our cooperator training is also coming up in September. And if either of these interest you, please consider visiting our website or shooting me an email. I'll put my email in the chat box in a little bit. We are welcoming today Josh Halman, who is the Forest Health Program Manager with the Vermont Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. And today he's going to share updates about the health of our forests and answer your questions. Regarding questions, if you would type them in the chat box, we'll get to them at the end of the program and have a little discussion going on if you've got any questions. And with that, I'll turn it over to Josh.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. I'm going to share my screen here and get rolling with this. Everything look good there?
It does. Yes.
Great. Excellent. All right. Well, yeah, again, thanks for joining us today. I'm going to be talking about, in general, kind of the forest health update from 2024 here in Vermont. And as I can, I'll update folks on what's been going on in 2025 with some of these pests and stressors in our forests. So yeah, put questions in the chat and I'm happy to answer as many as I can get to before the hour's up today. So we'll tick through a few of these things here. First thing that is probably on a lot of people's radar in the state is beech leaf disease. This is a nematode-based disease that affects American beech, and it actually affects all beech, including ornamental beech that may be present in the state. We first detected this in 2023 down in the southeast corner of the state in Brattleboro and in Vernon. And as you can see from the map, there's two different colors there. The second year of it being present in the state, it really expanded pretty dramatically. It went from 2 towns to 43 new towns in 2024, extending to 5 counties. You can see in the slide I say 6 counties because this year we actually do have another new detection in Mendon, Vermont, and Rutland County. So we're now up to 6 counties where this is present. And you can see some of the symptoms here in the pictures. What happens is these nematodes, which are kind of like small worm-like organisms, work their way into the buds and the leaves of the trees. And that dark banding that you're seeing when you look from the underside of the foliage up towards the sky is actually just the presence of millions of these little nematodes that are taking up the space and feeding on the cells within those leaves. And when you have them in such high numbers, you get early leaf drop, and oftentimes within a couple years you can have mortality of the trees. And I should note that this primarily affects the saplings when it first comes in. So you'll see understory mortality of saplings, understory deformation of leaves. And what we're seeing from areas of southern New England that have had this longer than us is that the longer you have these infestations, it ultimately can spread to those mature trees as well and start causing dieback, decline, and mortality. So it's certainly a concern for us here in Vermont. I want to show how this has spread throughout the country so far. So the first detection of this was in Ohio in 2012. And since that time, you can see that rapidly it has spread east and northeast from that first detection center. One kind of frustrating thing, admittedly, with this disease is that there's still a lot of research going on with it and still a lot of questions that are unanswered. One thing that is often asked about this is how is this actually spreading? And what researchers are kind of leaning on right now is that it may be wind mediated. And as you know, up here in Vermont, our weather patterns kind of come from that southwesterly direction oftentimes. So it's possible that these nematodes are spreading during wind events, during just general weather passing through. And yeah, if you look at the counties that were infected in 2023 versus 2024, you can see this big jump both in Vermont and then as you look to Maine, all but one county in Maine has this confirmed at this point. So it is a rapid spreader. And we're also part of a regional effort to monitor the presence of beech leaf disease as well as the severity of it. This is an effort that was started by the U.S. Forest Service out of Durham, New Hampshire. And we have 8 long-term beech leaf disease monitoring plots in the state. You can see them on the map here. They're kind of spread out. They don't cover every area of the state, of course, but these are plots that we visit annually to look for symptoms and see how the disease spreads through a stand. At none of these sites as of last year do we have any confirmation of beech leaf disease in our long-term plots. That I would expect to change possibly this year. Our staff are out right now in the coming weeks visiting these plots to do those assessments to see if we do have beech leaf disease in any of those. And the benefit of that will be that we're able, when we do have BLD there, is to track the progression of it, how quickly it might move from that understory layer up into the overstory, and see how quickly these stands decline. So we'll be continuing this for some years here, but currently do not have BLD in any of those plots. Something that's similarly frustrating about this disease is that there's not a forest-wide solution for it yet. As I mentioned, there's a lot of research going on with this disease, and something that is effective on yard trees that maybe in somebody's driveway. There are injections that you can use to combat BLD. And the only one that is approved for use in Vermont is this Arbatec 20S. And it's actually a fungicide. This is not a nematicide or some other kind of pesticide. It's a fungicide, but it still has some effectiveness on BLD. It interrupts the reproduction of the organism, it interrupts the larval stages there so that they cannot grow to mature adults that do the greatest harm within the leaves. So if you do have planted beech on your property that you're concerned about getting beech leaf disease, this is one option for you. But unfortunately, for a forest scale setting, we do not have a great solution yet for BLD. But as I mentioned, there is a lot of research going on with that right now. And hopefully something will bear out of that we could actually put to use here in Vermont. Want to move on to another relatively new insect that we have in the state. This is something called elm zigzag sawfly, and if you look at those feeding galleries on that leaf there, you can see why it gets that zigzag moniker. This was first confirmed in Vermont in 2023 in the northwest corner of the state on the Missisquoi National Wildlife Refuge, and we've been monitoring it since that time. What we found is that this will feed on all elm species that we have here in the state. But the preference, at least in Vermont, has been on Siberian elm. Some people have those as yard trees as well. And back in 2024, we did see quite a bit of, back in 2023 and 2024, we saw some trees that were heavily defoliated by this. But each time, those were Siberian elms that were being heavily defoliated. And we haven't had that many reports come in this year about it. It's still active. Haven't seen the full-scale defoliation as in years past, and not quite sure why that is. But whether or not this is a genuine threat to elm trees that are already suffering with, Dutch elm disease and other stressors, it's kind of unclear how big a threat this is actually going to be. But we are tracking this. We have detections almost everywhere in Vermont, almost every county, I should say, in Vermont. Orange County is the lone holdout, but I would suspect we'll find it there this year. Something interesting about the insect is that in warm climates, they can produce many generations per year, which leads to some of the dieback that they might be seeing in those states. In Vermont, we've only found that there are 2 generations per year of the insect, but we're continuing to look at that to see if certain weather conditions result in greater generations per year or not. So far, though, only 2 per year. But you can see that throughout the country, this is spreading maybe not as fast as beech leaf disease, but it is spreading pretty fast. And all the way down to North Carolina now is this present. So doesn't appear that it's something that's going to go away, but we're still trying to figure out how big of an impact this will have on the elms that we do have in the state. Another forest health issue that might be pretty fresh to some folks is spongy moth, which we had, if you remember, we had an outbreak starting in 2021 here. Um, Lasted for about 2 years. This was kind of during that droughty period that we had when the natural enemies of spongy moth weren't able to really activate because there wasn't enough moisture. And since we've started getting much more rain, that outbreak crashed, and we don't have any sense that there's any spongy moth defoliation this year, which is really good news. These egg mass counts that I'm showing here, we have 9 monitoring plots that are long-term throughout the state, and we check those out every year to see the numbers of egg masses that are on oak trees out there. And this pairs really well with those outbreak cycles. You know, if you look back in this chart, around 1990 was a pretty sizable outbreak that we had in the state. And then as you can see in 2021, we had another big outbreak. So this is a really good tool for us to use to help predict what's going to happen in the coming year. We'll be checking this again this fall to see if egg masses have built up again. And if so, notify the public that there might be an outbreak on our hands. But given all the moisture that we've had in the state, I don't suspect that we'll have high numbers going into 2026. One thing I should note as well, though, is that the legacy of that outbreak is still being felt in some parts of the state. This insect feeds primarily on oak species, but when they finish feeding on oak, if there's other species around, they will take advantage of that. And as you can see from some of these small dots on this map, this is from some of our aerial survey work that we do. Each year we fly the state in a small plane to map all the forest damage that we see. And in 2024, we mapped spongy moth mortality, so trees that died from spongy moth. And we had about 3,500 acres of mortality that were present in the state. So this can have a longer term impact on some of those stands if they were heavily defoliated. Luckily, we don't have the level of mortality that some of our southern New England states have had in recent outbreaks where they're in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of acres. So, you know, relatively good news, but if you're in an area where there was heavy spongy moth defoliation, you may see some tree mortality that's cropped up there. Moving on to hemlock woolly adelgid. So folks may be familiar with this. We've had this in the state for quite a while now, almost 20 years. And we track where it's present within the state. And I'll talk about a couple other things we do with it. But as you can see, it's really located in the southeast corner of the state. We have it in 3 counties in Bennington, Windsor, and Windham counties. And we look at those surrounding towns, around those towns that have been infested for a while each year to see if that infestation is spreading throughout the state. And so far in 2025, we've added 5 new towns that have confirmations of hemlock woolly adelgid. I think we added another 5 in 2024 as well. But one thing we're concerned about with this insect is not only the damage that it can cause to hemlocks, and I should note that in Vermont, we have not seen the heavy decline of hemlocks like you might have seen in the Smoky Mountains or more southern areas where this is present. And part of that explanation is that this insect is kind of controlled by cold winter temperatures. And what's helped it stay in the southeast corner of Vermont for so long is that we've had cold enough winters for it to knock down the population so that it's not expanding. But in recent years, we've had pretty warm winters. And so we're concerned about it spreading throughout the state. And as a result of that, we are doing monitoring surveys in every county within the state right now to look for this. You may be familiar with the Lake George area of New York that has recently had hemlock woolly adelgid confirmed. And because of its proximity to that western portion of Vermont, we're focusing some extra efforts over there to see if it's crossed our state line to come into either Addison or Rutland counties there especially. What do we do about this insect? Well, in addition to monitoring its presence, we have a number of plots that we've established for years that we look at the impact of hemlock woolly adelgid in those areas where it is present. And I think we have 4 locations of those in the state. In the southernmost portion of the state, we're starting to see some pretty heavy decline of those hemlocks that have had it for over a decade now. which is a much slower rate than you folks have seen in the Smoky Mountains, for instance. So that part is a little bit of good news. Um, Another thing that we do is we release biocontrol species for HWA. And historically, we've released one predator species. So we release a beetle known as Lyricobius nigrinus. And that is a beetle that will feed on those hemlock woolly adelgids and knock those populations down. In the last 2 years, we were able to get a additional species of Lyricobius known as Lyricobius osakensis to start releasing those as well. They have the same kind of mode of action. They're a predator. They feed on the adelgid and knock that population down. And so I'm glad that we're able to get these in sufficient numbers now that hopefully we'll start to have a established population that can continue to feed on HWA and won't require additional releases by us. But those are two tools we have right now for HWA. One thing that's brand new to us this year is an additional biocontrol species. These are silver flies. And the interesting thing about these are as well predators of HWA, but they're active in the summer months, whereas those Lyricobius species are present and active in the winter months. So by releasing another predator that feeds on the adelgid at a different life stage and a different time of year, we have a second tool to help knock this population down. So we had our first releases this year. 490 adults were released at Fort Dummer State Park, and they feed on the eggs of the HWA. So excited to have this in our program right now and hoping to have more of those to release in 2026 as well. Most of these that we get are from a rearing lab down at Virginia Tech University. So hopefully they'll have more for us next year and we can continue this effort. I mentioned a little bit about the temperature there. This is just a graph showing you winter mortality of HWA within the state. So we've been doing this since 2010, and the way we go about this is each winter we go out at the end of the winter and collect a bunch of branches that have a minimum of 200 adelgids on them. And we take them into the laboratory and inspect them under a microscope to see what percentage of those adelgids have actually died due to winter temperatures. And you can see this kind of bounces around a lot depending on the conditions that we have each year. But in general, the threshold to prevent spread of the insect in the state is about 90% mortality each winter. And in recent years, if you look at that figure, we're not that close to 90%. So that's why we're concerned about the spread of it. We'll be doing this again, of course, this winter. We've also started doing summer mortality assessments as well. There's been some evidence that too high of temperatures could actually kill the adelgids as well. And with some of the heat spells we've had recently in the state, that may have an opportunity to knock down these populations even further. So more to come on that, but that's some of the weather and mortality info we have on HWA. Another pest of hemlock that we have on our radar and have had it on our radar for quite a long time now is elongate hemlock scale. And I bring this up because oftentimes, both in Vermont and in other states, the most rapid rate of decline with hemlocks is when you have the presence of both elongate hemlock scale and HWA on these trees. And you can see that a lot of the towns on this map are in that area where HWA is present. Interestingly, we've got some towns up in Chittenden County where elongate hemlock scale is present, but HWA is not. And we think that the area up there near Burlington that has it, that these were probably brought in due to ornamental species being planted in different yards, and they came in on that material and have since spread. We're not really seeing any decline up there with elongate hemlock scale, but if HWA does make its way up there, it would be concerning for the health of a lot of those trees. So similar to HWA, we continue to do surveys around the state to identify locations where this is present, but it doesn't appear to be spreading as rapidly as HWA is. This is a species emerald ash borer that you've probably heard about for many years now, even before it got to Vermont. But we first got emerald ash borer in 2018. And that first detection was in the Plainfield Orange area of the state. Shortly after that, we detected it in Grand Isle County and then in Bennington County. And as you can see, this map is really filled in with a lot of towns in Vermont having emerald ash borer now. We have at least 114 towns with EAB in Vermont. The one pocket where we have not been able to find it yet is in Essex County. However, we're still looking there. We do a lot of detection efforts for emerald ash borer. We put up those purple traps you've likely seen. In 2024, those yielded none for us, but in past years, we've been successful in finding EAB in a couple of those. And another thing that we do is establish what are called trap trees in the state. And basically what we do there is in the springtime, we go out to areas where we're concerned about EAB present for one reason or another. Oftentimes this is either in state parks or on state forests. And we actually girdle the trees. We use a draw knife and girdle the trees in May. And that stress of girdling the tree is actually an attractant to EAB. And so by girdling them, we expect that any EAB that are nearby would flock to that tree, lay eggs, and have larvae develop within the tree itself. So we come back in the fall and we cut those trees and peel all the bark off them, and look for the galleries. And you can kind of see what those galleries look like in this image on the bottom right here. The EAB has this textbook S-shaped gallery that nothing else has that pattern on ash trees. So if we do see that, then we're able to confirm that EAB is present at those sites. Other things that we do, this is just a map of those purple traps on the left there from 2023. That's generally the kind of spread that we try to get with those traps. And another map on the right there showing the distribution of our trap trees. So we really are trying to pick this up wherever we can and try and spread it throughout the state, so it's pretty comprehensive. I talked about biocontrol species for HWA, but we also have biocontrol species that we release for emerald ash borer. And this is an image of those insects. We're fortunate to be able to get 3 species to release for emerald ash borer control. That's Spathius galeni, Obius agrilli, and Tetrasticus planopenisi. And these operate a little bit differently than those HWA predators. These are what are known as parasitoids. So they don't actually feed on emerald ash borer adults or anything like that. What they do is lay eggs in different life stages of EAB. So the Spathius and Tetrasticus both lay eggs in the larvae of EAB, and the Obius species lays its eggs in the EAB eggs itself. And what's really interesting about this is that as those eggs develop within whatever life stage they're targeting, that development of the parasitoids within the EAB actually kills the EAB. And so they can reduce populations by as much as 50% in a stand if they're in high levels. And we've been releasing these for some years now. Show you a map here. The yellow stars, if you can see that, are the first 5 sites where we had some of these releases take place. And this year we have 8 active sites within the state where we're releasing these. And one thing to note, I get a lot of questions about how can we get these into our town forests or into my land. It's a little tricky in that we receive these insects from the USDA, and they require that the only people that can actually release them are either researchers or state agencies. The other thing that's really important with these biocontrol species is that EAB has to be present on the site. Otherwise, those parasitoids have nothing to lay their eggs in and reproduce. So those are 2 kind of qualifications that we have about this. But this year, were able to collect some logs from those initial stands where we released these and put them in some rearing barrels so that we could have an enclosed system where we could look for the emergence of those parasitoids to confirm that we have an established population of those that can continue to impact the EAB levels within those stands. And early evidence shows that we've at least been able to recover the Spathius species from those, which is good news. And we're waiting to see what else comes out of those logs as the summer progresses. But establishing those is certainly very helpful in mitigating EAB in these areas. Something that's worth noting is that there are solutions for trees that do have emerald ash borer in them aside from those biocontrols. And some folks have already taken full advantage of that within the state. The use of chemicals such as emamectin benzoate and azadirachtin, uh, especially emamectin benzoate, is a very effective chemical in reducing and killing all the EAB in a given tree. And these are applied through stem injection, actually. It's not a bark spray. It's actually a specialized type of material to be able to inject trees with this insecticide that is effective for anywhere from 2 to 4 years, depending on the level of infestation that you have. Very effective, but must be applied by a certified pesticide applicator. You can find a lot of those folks that are able to do that by going to, I think the website is treesaregood.org, and that's the International Society of Arboriculture. And you can find a certified pesticide applicator and arborist that might be close to you. So if this is something of interest, I encourage you to look at that website and see if there's somebody close by that could help you out with treating some of your trees. The best time to treat trees is in the spring after any flowering has occurred. And summer, they're still taking up water and nutrients and that sort of thing. So transpiration is still occurring. Treating them in late fall or winter is not very effective because the tree is not conducting very much fluid through the tree at that point. Basal bark spray is another option. It's less effective than these injections, but in some states, folks have been using that. However, there are limitations in Vermont now that we have a neonicotinoid ban. So in a forest setting, dinotefuran would be able to be used, but if they're planted trees, that's not going to be allowed anymore due to the new law in Vermont. It's been a lot of doom and gloom so far, so I want to tell you a little bit about a good news story that we have relative to EAB, and that's some of the black ash work that we're doing right now. Black ash is the species of ash most vulnerable to mortality from emerald ash borer, and black ash is a very important tree in the state for a number of reasons. Ecologically, it's often in these wet areas. That losing those trees, you could change the hydrologic nature of a site. And so it's concerning that if we lose trees in there, the wetlands might not function the way that they should be functioning. And similarly, in terms of importance, this is a very culturally significant species to indigenous people in Vermont. There's a lot of information and stories and cultural knowledge about black ash from Abenaki folks. And we're working with some of our partners there to identify areas that have good black ash that would be either candidates for treating them to preserve them, for collecting seed to be able to regenerate this even once EAB has gone through. And one thing that's been really exciting is to be able to host some pounding workshops for black ash. And if you're not familiar with black ash and its uses, basket weaving is often used with black ash, what are called splints. Basically, after you've cut a tree and peel the bark off of it, you are able to, with heavy mallets, kind of bang the logs themselves, and the growth rings will actually separate, and you can peel those off the tree, save those, or use them pretty soon thereafter to help weave baskets. And that's a very important part of Abenaki culture. And so we've been fortunate enough to host 3 of those pounding workshops so far, one in 2024 and 2 in 2025. So that's been really exciting to be able to share some of that knowledge and have our Abenaki partners help educate a lot of the public on the importance of this species to their culture and to the state. Show you what one of those flyers looked like. Lake Bomoseen was where we held one of those workshops this year. Pretty successful. We had a number of people out there. A lot of people decided to fish instead of help with the workshop, but we had a number of folks that attended, and those that did attend really got a lot out of it. So we expect to be hosting more of these in future years. We'd like to hold at least 3 more in the state. And we're starting the planning for next year right now, and we'll make that information available probably through social media, as well as maybe a press release as well. So moving on from EAB, want to talk a little bit about some other softwood issues that we've got. White pine needle disease is something that we hear about every year and that we see every year. This is a complex of fungal species that's present in our white pines. And this is separate from what you might typically see on the highways as you're driving in the spring or even in the summer, where you've got red trees that are on the sides of the highways. Most of the time, that is due to salt spray and not white pine needle disease. But if you are in the interior forest and you see yellowing needles, early needle drop especially, I don't know if folks have pines in their driveway or not, I do. And in June, I start to get needles raining down on my truck all the time, which is not supposed to happen with white pine. They shed needles typically later in the summer or early fall. So it's a concern that you're losing this big source of foliage from these trees. And the way that this disease works is that the level of severity that's expressed is due to the previous year's precipitation. And as you know, in the last few years, we've had very heavy spring precipitation, resulting in terrible things like flooding. And this level of moisture, we think, is making this even more severe in recent years in Vermont. And in fact, last year when we did our aerial surveys, this was the #1 damage agent in terms of acreage. We had over 80,000 acres of white pine needle disease that were mapped in the state. So we've been monitoring the progression of this at 4 long-term sites in the state. And what you're looking at here, obviously years on the x-axis, and the mean severity score on your y-axis. Basically, as you go further up, the more severe things are. And we measure both the yellowing severity and how much defoliation has occurred due to white pine needle disease each year. And 2024 saw our highest levels for both those metrics. I'd expect something similar, maybe a little less in 2025. We've done those surveys already. I don't have the data yet, but we should have that in the next few weeks. And we'll see what happens with the 2026 white pine needle disease as well. Expect that. We had ample precipitation again this spring, so I would expect we'd see something close to what we've been seeing for the last 3 years. Red pine scale. I don't know if folks have had a chance to see any stands where red pine is dominant. And if you have, you may have seen the whole stand sometimes turning bright red. You can see some of these aerial images on the bottom left there. Those are red pine stands that are bright red during the summer months, kind of a rapid decline in those stands. And for many years, we were not sure exactly what was causing this. States like New Hampshire, Maine, Massachusetts, and New York all had detected red pine scale throughout their states and have seen that as being the causal agent of a lot of the decline that they have there. And we had been pretty unsuccessful in actually finding red pine scale. We'd been looking for years and years, and last year we were fortunate to take advantage of a harvest that was happening at Perry Hill in Vermont, and we're able to sample some of the tops there to look for red pine scale. And we saw something that was suspicious, and we're finally able to send that in to our colleagues at the U.S. Forest Service. And as of December last year, we were finally able to confirm through DNA analysis that indeed we do have red pine scale in the state. So we are fortunate to know what might be heavily contributing to some of this decline in mortality. Whether or not that is the only agent that's causing this, we're unsure of. We've detected other fungal species and pests that are in some of these trees as well. So red pine scale may be the thing that's really tipping the scales to get it to that mortality threshold. But there may be other stressors that are weakening the trees prior to the presence there as well. I think the last pest I'm going to talk about today is spruce budworm. So this is a native insect that has periodic outbreaks in the region, both in the United States and Canada. And the last outbreak we had was, back in the early 1980s, and these numbers have been pretty low for quite a while. But you can see in the graph here that we had a spike happen with our moth capture. We put out traps every year. We have 7 traps that are located each year where we have a heavy spruce fir component. And despite the name of these, they actually prefer to feed on fir trees. And we had a big spike in our moth catch a couple of years ago, which really concerned us to be thinking, oh my gosh, do we have an outbreak here? Because when these do feed, they can really rip through a stand. And if you've been to Quebec recently or New Brunswick or Nova Scotia, you may have seen the impact of this, is that they feed very quickly and leave dead trees in their wake. And so we were concerned about that high moth catch and didn't know what to make of it. There is another method to more thoroughly detect the presence of spruce budworm and the levels at which they're reproducing, which is called a larval sampling or an L2 sampling. And we don't do that in-house. Basically, you have to have branches. They have to be processed in a laboratory with special chemicals, and then the number of larvae that are present within there is an indicator of whether or not you have an impending outbreak. So our colleagues at the University of Maine were very gracious and allowed us to send in a bunch of samples to look for high numbers of those larval spruce budworm to say whether or not we had an outbreak on our hands. And the data came back from them showing that we did not have any larvae in numbers that were of concern, which was great to hear. And the reason that we think we got these high numbers in our moth catch is that they're very good flyers. And when weather patterns are dipping down from an existing outbreak, as is going on in Canada currently, those always have the opportunity to actually cross into Vermont and then get captured by our traps. So we think that that spike was due to one of those fly-ins from an existing outbreak either in Ontario or Quebec. And then as you can see, we looked at trap numbers again the following year, and those numbers were much lower. Despite that, we have sent in, or we did send in, a number of samples again to the University of Maine to see if we have a buildup going on, even if we didn't catch that many moths. And the data that came back from them was that we had absolutely zero larvae in the branches that we sent in, which is great news for us. If you exceed 7 larvae per branch, that's when folks recommend having some sort of intervention, such as a spray program to mitigate the impact of spruce budworm on your forests. But currently, we do not have a population that would make us go that route. However, I will close with this, is that this is recent data from June of this year showing in the dark polygons there the current outbreak in Canada. And these kind of dots on the map, I guess you could call them, that are not as solid color as you might see in the polygons themselves. Those are actually clouds of moths that are blowing through the landscape due to weather patterns. And as you can see from that June 23rd map, we do have some blow-in from Canada happening in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine this year. So we're going to be checking our traps again, obviously, to see if we captured a lot more, and that might be the reason that our numbers are higher. But again, like in last year and 2 years prior to that, we'll be sending more samples to the labs in Maine for further analysis to see if we do have any sort of outbreak that might be impending. This is a big concern. Folks in Maine are very concerned about this right now. You can see that there is some defoliation that has happened in northern Maine. I think a little bit of spruce budworm may have been detected from aerial surveys in New Hampshire already this year. So we actually have crews that are flying the state right now as part of our aerial survey program, looking to see if we do have anything that's on the landscape level of defoliation within the state. So that, coupled with our trap data and the branch sampling that we'll be doing, we should be able to have a better picture relatively soon of what the forecast is for spruce budworm in the state. So that's what I've got for slides for you today, and I am happy to field any questions you might have.
Thanks, Josh. Let's see, you can stop sharing the slides if you want.
Happy to.
Put you back there. That sounds great. So there are some questions in the chat. I'm going to go back to sort of the beginning. So it starts with hemlock woolly adelgid. And so someone wanted to know if the biocontrol species that are being introduced for HWA are native to the US.
They are actually. That's the really interesting thing, is that they are from the Pacific Northwest. And out there, they have been very effective at controlling HWA populations. Don't know, it's kind of a mystery why why HWA still is able to kind of persist in the East with the presence of those. compared to what happens on the West Coast, but they are native insects actually, just from a different portion of the country.
Great. There is a question to see if you could share the EAB release sites from the town of Addison or Rutland, if you could say where the towns were. For
The
EAB.
the biocontrol release sites in
Yeah.
Addison and Rutland. Let me pull up my map real quick. Let's see, where have I got that? In Rutland County. So I think I'm gonna have to admit my lack of geographic knowledge about which county this is in, but I think the one that's either in Rutland or Addison County is, I believe, in the Narrows Wildlife Management Area. It's either there or I don't think it's in Tinmouth Channel. It's one of the two there.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And the question about treating, if you're treating your trees, how often is it? Every 2 years, every 3 years? What's the recommendation for that?
Yeah, the label on the product says to treat every 2 years. We have seen effectiveness, well, I should say research has shown effectiveness for as much as 4 years, but 3 years is generally accepted as a pretty good window that chemical is effective. What I would encourage people to do is monitor the health of your trees each year. And if you've injected your trees and you start seeing further decline of the tree, and even more presence of emerald ash borer, that might be a sign that you need to treat more frequently. But in general, 3 years seems to be doing a pretty good job of keeping down the EAB.
Great. Looking at the EAB, the wasps that were introduced for them, is there a danger of those wasps doing the larva or eggs any damage of native species? Or are they really targeted on the EAB?
Yeah, it's a really great question. They are very specific to emerald ash borer. I think two of the three are exclusive to emerald ash borer, and the other one I think can lay eggs in maybe one other species of buprestid, but we don't have many of that species of buprestid that it would be a large impact. So in general, it's a good thing saving those trees.
I will say I'm impressed with the way you said all their names.
I've had to say them a lot, so I got practice.
Someone suggested, and this is something you can bring back to your team, an ash pounding workshop at the Abenaki Day at the Maritime Museum here in Addison County.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah.
So that might be something that your team can connect with as an
Yeah,
option. Yeah,
that's
we
outstanding.
advertise those in our e-news, so hopefully you got some attendance from that exposure
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you.
So another question is about the white pine needle disease. Is that happening statewide? And what's the mortality from it? And is there any way to prevent the spread? So we'll throw all three at you.
Sure thing. All right, let's see if I can remember them all. It is statewide. We see it in every county, and the severity is pretty similar between sites even. So it's pretty uniform in how it affects these trees. As far as mortality goes, despite this being present for so long, we're actually not seeing mortality from this. There might be an isolated tree here or there, but what we do see is a great reduction in annual radial growth. So the tree rings basically just are super small on these trees that have had this for many years. I think one thing that's allowing those trees to persist is that because this whole complex is reliant on the previous year's moisture levels, it's infecting older needles. And so it's old needles that are actually being shed, and the current year foliage that's emerging from those buds each year, that's unaffected in that growing season. So that's still a pool of photosynthate that those trees can use to generate carbohydrates and survive. So it's reducing growth tremendously, but we're not seeing heavy mortality from this yet. Was there a third part?
Any way to prevent the spread?
Prevent it. There really is. I mean, if you have a few trees that you're really concerned about, one thing you can do, and it's kind of the thing that we recommend for any fungal diseases that are coming through, is to make sure that your trees are not incredibly dense. You know, creating some air space. If you've planted pines, make sure that there's ample spacing between them so air is able to move through and moisture is not just pooling around your foliage.
There's a question of how can you tell the difference between a white pine dying of old age versus needle disease?
Well, with the needle diseases, it's really the timing of both the yellowing and the needle drop. So you start to see the yellowing in June, in early June, and needles will be dropping around late June to early July. And pines could be dying from any number of causes. So there is that possibility that those two might have like a perfect synergy where you're seeing a tree that's dying from other causes in late June with similar symptoms to white pine needle disease. But because we're not seeing much mortality with this, if your trees are in fact dying, right now the indication is that it's probably not just from white pine needle disease. It could have some other secondary stressor that's compounding with white pine needle disease to tip the scales to where it is dying. But that white pine needle disease just by itself doesn't appear to be killing our trees right now.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a good question here. Are any of the federal budget cutbacks or recalling of grants or anything like that going to affect the ability to continue to track the spread of these pests in Vermont and nationwide?
It's a day-to-day question. It seems like information that we get changes really quickly right now. So it's hard to say what those impacts are going to be on us in the short term or the long term. Right now, the last that I've seen, I think about a month ago, we were pretty scared about what we were hearing come out from Washington. But at least in the short term, we do have funding for the 2025 into 2026 season, which is great news. That was kind of questionable for a while, and signs right now are pointing to the fact that we should be able to get funding for fiscal year 26 as well. So again, take that with a grain of salt because I'm seeing things change on a daily basis here. But what was pretty catastrophic in our minds a month ago seems to have abated a little bit right now. So hopefully we'll be able to continue this.
That's good news. Thank you.
Yeah.
Another question, I'm seeing a lot of die-off of hemlock in the Shrewsbury area. Is this likely to be due to age versus hemlock woolly adelgid?
It's a good question. The best way to address that would be in the winter months, if you can get into some of those sites to look for signs of hemlock woolly adelgid being present. And if you saw it in those photos, I didn't do a great job of pointing it out there, but that what we call flocculence, that kind of white fuzzy material that's on the underside of branches, generally along the stems there, that's clearly hemlock woolly adelgid. So if you do find that there in the winter months, that's a sign that that's what would be causing that.
Great. So I have a question. We focus on landowners and others who care about forests. They might be on their town forest committee. What are your recommendations, in terms of forest health, like in addressing either these issues or to prevent these issues from the future? How should they look at management?
Yeah, that's a huge question, a great question. One thing that I try to champion whenever I can is to maintain biodiversity in your forests. A lot of these pests that I've gone through today are obviously species specific. And, if you're managing, let's say you were just managing a sugar bush just for sap production, and you've removed all the other species out of there so you can maximize your yield. That's like a very risky thing to be doing when we have insects such as forest tent caterpillar that can come through in an outbreak, and it's basically a buffet for those caterpillars. Nothing to stop them, just keep going and feeding. But if you do have other species there, even red maple, forest tent caterpillar, for instance, will not feed on red maple. So if you have some diversity to break up some of the feeding that's going on and break up the numbers of some of these pests, that could be a huge win for your forest health in general. In addition to that, I would say I think everybody that's probably on this call is always keeping their eyes on the forest and continuing to monitor things and make a note of anything that's unusual that you haven't seen before, especially, or if you have concerns about something that you do see that you think might be a suspect. I'd encourage you to submit pictures. We have a tool at the website vtinvasives.org It's called Report It, and you can submit photos, and we'll have a team of experts look at those to see if there's anything of concern that we might need to go out there and make a site visit and evaluate what's going on. So just being aware of what's going on out there and keeping your woods diverse.
How many of these types of outbreaks that were found were through something like Report It?
Oh, we've had a huge number of, especially like the emerald ash borer detections and hemlock woolly adelgid detections come through Report It. It's a really useful tool. Yeah.
Do you guys look at iNaturalist at all to see if, people who don't know about Report It or put things up on iNaturalist?
Yeah, we looked there a little bit, and actually that's how our elm zigzag sawfly first detection came in, was through iNaturalist. It's much easier for us to be able to track something like Report It, but we are checking iNaturalist whenever we can. Yeah.
That's great, because I do know some of our cooperators and friends do like to post to iNaturalist, and they may not have known about Report It. So hopefully
Yeah.
you all who are on this call can share with your peers about Report It, and another way of sharing their knowledge and connecting with the woods and the health of our woods. It looks like that's all the questions that I have in the chat, Josh. So
Okay.
unless there's anything else from anybody, um, everyone's saying thanks for a great update on forest pests. We usually try and do this about once a year with Josh. He's the man in the know, and always enjoy learning a little bit from him. And he does create at least a little hope in everything that he gives. So we appreciate that, Josh.
Great.
Um,
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us today, and you can find more opportunities for programs by subscribing to our e-news. If you enjoy our programs, please consider a donation on our website, www.vtcoverts.org. And we wish everybody an opportunity to stay cool today and a wonderful rest of your summer. Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Great. Thanks, everyone.